A U.S. warship has sailed near the disputed Scarborough Shoal claimed by China in the South China Sea, a move likely to anger Beijing at a time of tense ties between the world's two biggest economies. The destroyer USS Preble carried out the operation on Sunday, a U.S. military spokesman said. The busy waterway is one of a growing number of flashpoints in the U.S.-China relationship, which also include a trade war, the blacklisting of tech company Huawei, U.S. sanctions, and Taiwan. Preble sailed within 12 nautical miles of Scarborough Reef in order to challenge excessive maritime claims and preserve access to the waterways as governed by international law. It was the second such U.S. military operation in the South China Sea in the past month. On Wednesday, the chief of the U.S. Navy said its freedom of navigation movements in the disputed South China Sea drew more attention than they deserved. The U.S. military has a long-standing position that its operations are carried out throughout the world, including areas claimed by allies, and they are separate from political considerations. The operation was the latest attempt to counter what Washington sees as Beijing's efforts to limit freedom of navigation in the strategic waters where Chinese, Japanese, and some Southeast Asian navies operate. China claims almost all of the strategic South China Sea and frequently lambasts the U.S. and its allies over naval operations near Chinese-occupied islands. Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam have competing claims in the region. China and the U.S. have repeatedly traded barbs in the past over what Washington says is Beijing's militarization of the South China Sea by building military installations on artificial islands and reefs. China defends its construction as necessary for self-defense and says the U.S. is responsible for ratcheting up tension in the region by sending warships and military planes close to islands, Beijing claims. Last month, China's Navy chief said freedom of navigation should not be used to infringe upon the rights of other nations. The U.S. Navy, Japan, Australia, and Philippines stopped China in South China Sea. Could the United States, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines collectively thwart China's sizable and seriously dangerous navy over the South China Sea and the Pacific? Given the deteriorating threat environment in the Pacific theater and the rapidly expanding Chinese Navy, it is undoubtedly a complicated and frequently asked subject. Recently, military chiefs from the four nations gathered in Manila to discuss ways to improve cooperation, interoperability, and joint international deterrence operations. According to an interesting Navy report, all four of the major allied Pacific states participated in the discussions by conducting a submarine hunting P-8M maritime patrol over the South China Sea. The Navy report stated that during the flight, they had the opportunity to examine the maritime environment and talk on how to improve interoperability, maintain regional stability, and uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific. Most important would be the interfaces, gateways, and communications systems linking the various forces to one another. Leaders of these nations would undoubtedly frequently be motivated to discuss collaboration and interoperability in the Pacific. The U.S., Japan, Australia, and the Philippines may be positioned to thwart or destroy Chinese attacks depending on the level of networking, forward-positioned assets, and speed of response time. China may outnumber the U.S. Navy in terms of sheer size, and perhaps only a fraction of the U.S. Navy's maritime combat power could be positioned in the Pacific at any given time. Through port visits and joint drills, one method to encourage expanding international connectivity, both Australian and U.S. warships were in Manila at the same time. The summit coincides with port visits to Manila by three of the partner navies: the amphibious assault ship USS America, LHA-6, the helicopter-carrying destroyer JS Izumo, DDH-183, and the landing helicopter dock ship HMAS Canberra, L-02. The ability to thwart any attempt by China to annex disputed territories in the South China Sea would ultimately depend on quick reaction times, adequate surveillance to see an attack in time, and swift multilateral air and surface mobilization. A significant amount of multinational, multi-domain networking is undoubtedly made possible by the fact that three of the governments convening to discuss corporations concerned security in the South China Sea are F-35 equipped nations. Australia may not yet have the F-35B with vertical takeoff, but it is an F-35 nation. The Royal Australian Navy might not be able to fire its F-35s from its helicopter landing docks, but it might place the aircraft in friendly countries like Japan, the Philippines, or Guam. Additionally, Japan has an F-35B and Aegis-capable military, meaning it can fly fifth-generation aircraft with vertical takeoff and landing just as the U.S. Navy's USS America. This is very important because, should surveillance assets detect threats in time for the aircraft to arrive, Japanese and U.S. F-35s may quickly establish air superiority over the South China Sea.